Michael, you've already had to listen to my rather lengthy review of Burberry's Fall-Winter Runway show, which I was fortunate enough to attend in London back in February. I will spare all of you here, but in short, I want it all, and the coats and shoes are non-negotiable.
Yes, I know you want every single item in looks number 12 and number 35.
You're wonderful, but I'm not going to wait until fall to get in on the Burberry magic, and my fellow mothers, neither should you. Our day is coming, Sunday, May 11th, in fact, and Burberry has so many delights in store for us.
The brand's new campaign shows them off in style. It stars Jerry Hall and two of her daughters, Lizzie and Georgia May Jagger, as well as two of her grandchildren, and it brings us into their stylish world.
In my next life, I really wouldn't mind being a Jagger, but for now, I'll settle for a Burberry trench coat, or shall I say another one. I rely on my Waterloo heritage for approximately 300 days of the year. London life practically requires it. There are lots of great versions to choose from, but I'm also loving how details from the trench are showing up in subtle ways in Burberry's jackets and dresses.
And for those of you who are really stuck on Mother's Day gifts, the Highland family of bags will not fail you, especially the tote and crossbody in Burberry check. That motif also appears in sunglasses, wallets, bags, and even reversible wool capes that are sure to charm the stylish women in your life.
Don't fail us this Mother's Day. One word, Burberry.com. We'll love you for life. Happy Saturday. It's April 26th, 2025, and you are listening to Morning Meeting. I'm Ashley Baker in London.
And I'm Michael Haney in New York City.
And what a week, Michael. It's been in the news. In the UK, we are having a bumper crop of rhubarb and asparagus after enjoying an unusually sunny March, so please do come visit us. Meanwhile, back home in the US, the National Institutes of Health, or NIH, is amassing private medical records, which will be allocated to a study on autism. This was, of course, masterminded by the Health and Human Services Secretary, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. This week, he also declared that, quote, sugar is poison, which is very bad news for those of us who are just using Reese's Pieces to cope. If he comes for the alcohol, we're officially emigrating. But as usual, Michael, Airmail and Morning Meeting are the antidote to all of this news.
It sure is. But first, did you know that the Trump family has reportedly made $100 million from trading fees on their own cryptocurrencies? All of it represents what may be the biggest financial scandal in presidential history. And Jacob Silverman is going to join us to tell us all about it. Then, speaking of murky businesses operating out of sight, Dana Vachon will join us with a story we call 20,000 Kilos Under the Sea. It is his wild report on how drug traffickers in Europe have now taken to using submarines in order to move their goods onto the continent. And finally, it's almost summer, Ashley, which means it's time to throw a few good paperbacks into your beach bag. Now, it may be true that you cannot judge a book by its cover, but as Sloane Crosley, one of our favorite and funniest writers, argues, you can often count on paperbacks to look great. And Sloane is going to share her list of the most distinctive paperbacks of the past 100 years. So, Ashley, where would you like to begin today?
Michael, I'm afraid we don't have a choice. We have to talk about the elephant in the room, which is Trump's blatant profiteering off of the financial instability of the markets. Jacob Silverman is here to explain it all. And if anyone knows crypto, it is him. He is the author of Easy Money, Cryptocurrency, Casino Capitalism, and the Golden Age of Fraud. How appropriate.
Okay, welcome, Jacob.
Thanks for having me.
So, Jacob, as you detail in your column this week, everyone's talking about the first 100 days of the Trump administration, but you have a probably lesser-known fact, which is the first $100 million that Trump made just in the first day or two of his administration, thanks to cryptocurrencies. Take us inside this, what he did, how he did it, and maybe why.
Well, Trump famously, or somewhat famously, was against Bitcoin and cryptocurrency some years ago during his first term. He said it was a scam, he thought, and competed with the dollar. And in some ways, he was right. But clearly, his mind was changed by the flood of campaign contributions from the crypto industry in 2024, which became the biggest donor by industry, I believe, to the Republicans. But Trump took things a step further in really becoming one of the country's leading crypto entrepreneurs. I mean, at first, I think some people thought, when they heard last year that he was getting into the crypto industry, it might just be, an NFT project or some little token or something. But he actually has, in the last year, put together a really big portfolio of deals and companies and kind of potential projects, all of them rather kind of sketchy or fly by night in the way you might expect with Trump and with crypto. But there's a lot going on there, and there's a lot of money that Trump is able to take in now especially via fees on the trading of the Trump meme coin that he released. So, while folks are justifiably focused on the chaos of tariffs or conflicts with top universities or anything else like that, I am personally riveted by what seems like this enormous grift happening right in the open of tens or hundreds of millions of dollars flowing into the president's pockets.
As you said, it's a grift that you think is happening right in the open. To quote from your column this week, you think it may represent the biggest financial scandal in presidential history?
Yeah, I gave that some thought, and perhaps there is some previous president who has pocketed more than $100 million or the equivalent thereof during their time in office, but corruption comes in various forms. But here we can actually see dollar amounts. Like, for example, Trump's main crypto company, but he has several, is World Liberty Financial, which he started with the sons of Steve Witkoff, his diplomatic envoy to the Middle East. And one of the first big investors in that company was a guy named Justin Sun, who's this rather notorious Chinese crypto entrepreneur who kind of bounces between various island jurisdictions until he's no longer welcome in one and then moves on to another. And Sun publicly invested $75 million in World Liberty Financial. And then after that, he did it in two different transactions. It was talked about on X. He celebrated, the Witkoff celebrated, the Trump team welcomed him. And then about a week after that second tranche of his investment went through, the SEC paused a fraud investigation into Sun. This is $1 billion fraud case that we were talking about. So his pockets are open, the money is coming through. We're already seeing these apparent quid pro quos happen.
So this is an important question, and maybe I think I'd probably speak for a lot of people because I've spoken to a lot of people who still are, like me, a little hazy about crypto and how it works in Bitcoin. So that's a transaction that the one you just mentioned, apparently we have visibility into that, right? But are there other transactions that regulators don't have visibility into? Is it a place where money is moving around untraceable?
Yes, there is sort of a myth of crypto and certainly an industry-friendly line that, hey, this is all very transparent. It's on some public ledger called the blockchain. That's partially true, but there are ways to obfuscate the trails of crypto. There are also ways to trade crypto or transmit money that are less traceable or don't really involve the blockchain. So I think it's still an open question of where a lot of the money is coming from. We know there's some of these major instances like that fellow Justin Sun I mentioned that were publicly announced. But for example, when the Trump token debuted, there were a lot of transactions that seemed to be coming from China. And, that might just be Chinese crypto speculators who want in on the Trump coin, or it could be, something more state directed. And those are the kinds of questions that are still hard to answer, partly because Trump is removing all the guardrails over financial crime in general, but especially the crypto industry.
It is then possible that there are large sums of money that would be going into those portfolios, as you might call them, and we'd have no idea that they were in there, right?
Very much so, yes. That's what the nature kind of crypto, too, is that it's a business that it's not really a business. I mean, they're not producing anything novel here. It's more like they've created a convenient vehicle for potential money laundering and receiving large sums of money. And I would very much expect that there's more than what's being announced.
And when Trump is out there, or Melania, by the way, who is part of that $100 million, asking for quote unquote investment, is this as simple as in some ways like a pump and dump? They can just get money, take it out and go?
Yes. So the Trump meme coin and the Melania meme coin, those were classic pump and dumps. These are tokens that aren't really worth anything. They're just linked to notable figures. And this kind of thing happens every day. And usually the token barely acquires any value. Then it disappears from public view within seconds or minutes. But because this is Trump and he has such a huge media platform, of course, the hype encourages people to speculate and buy in and think that they can buy and sell before it all comes crashing down. And we've already had it crash a couple times. The other thing he's doing, though, is he is essentially printing his own money. First, he is releasing these tokens, which are very low. He doesn't really have to put any money into that, and then he's selling them to people. But he's also going to introduce a stable coin, which is basically like a digital dollar. And there are ways in which this kind of represents or reflects counterfeiting the dollar. Basically, when you start getting into this kind of business, it's a quick leap to basically printing money out of thin air. And that's essentially describes the business that Trump is in.
I worry I know the answer to this question already. Is any regulatory or checks and balance world moving to put some guardrails on this, or is it just wide open now and everyone's sort of like getting it while they can?
Unfortunately, it is the latter.
Is it a stretch as well? I mean, when you say, if you're printing your own money in a way, in some ways, you kind of, and you're the executive in chief, president, commander in chief, you sort of like might not really care what happens to the dollar, right? Or you might want to bet against it, right?
Yeah, and that has been an accusation or sort of a fear even around crypto billionaires in general. I think the Peter Thiel types, he is a tech first guy, but believes in crypto and it has bought into it. They maybe start believing that this notion that crypto or Bitcoin specifically could be an alternative, or that they can just print their own tokens to the fiat money system, which the collapse of which would be calamitous, of course, for it's what everything runs on. But you start worrying that maybe that they believe that this myth or this story, because when you get free money, I mean, what's easier and more appealing than that?
What's next? I know this is a fast-moving world, but what do you see is the next headline that's going to bubble up here?
I think we'll see more bizarre stories, more kind of political stunts, and more giveaways to the industry. But eventually there's going to be another bubble burst or another collapse in the crypto industry. And my fear is that it'll then be so entangled in mainstream finance that it's unfortunately going to affect the rest of us.
Well, Jacob, what's bad for the rest of us is good for you.
That's what I chronicle. Yeah.
We'll be fortunate to have you back here to explain not if, but when the next problem hits us. Thanks so much for making sense of it and enlightening us. It's terrific as always to have you here.
I appreciate it.
But now let's move on to something else I struggle to understand, which is cocaine trafficking in Europe. Who knew it was such a complicated issue? Dana Vachon did. He is a writer based in Lisbon, as well as the author of the novel Mergers and Acquisitions. Welcome, Dana.
Thank you guys for having me.
So, Dana, you are living in Lisbon, and your story in the issue this week introduces us to a very intriguing and colorful personality that you have encountered there. Tell us all about the nerve center of European drug trafficking and the gentleman who's in charge of it.
So his name is Jordan Top, and he is a Dutch national police officer who runs MAOC N, which was formed actually very recently after 9/11. So one of the good things that happened from power consolidations after 9/11 was the Atlantic powers realized that they were often chasing after the same ships in the middle of the Atlantic, right, which is in an international body of water, and that this was not ideal. So they formed this nerve center with 7 nations, I believe it was originally, to be more efficient in their interdictions and to share information to increase their effectiveness. I think he's now at the end of his term, but his is an interesting term because after COVID, appetite, demand for this quintessential gray market good, right? I mean, cocaine is fascinating because it ends up at the poshest tables. So it sort of connects the most unspoken, unseen elements of society with the most, in many cases, lauded elements of society. And demand for it has surged after the lockdowns of COVID. And also, I think, it has to be said in some kind of anesthetic response to the world that COVID birthed. This is obviously a piece about trafficking from Latin America to Europe. We know that Europe, which consumes 21% of global cocaine, has seen a 60% rise in cocaine residues in wastewater post-COVID. So that's like a gigantic leap.
It's like the 80s are back in more ways than one, financially, politically, and pharmaceutically.
There you go.
So Dana, how are all of these drugs getting to Europe? What do we know about that? I mean, I assume that people are not like smuggling these in on commercial airline flights the way that we once believed.
Well, so the cartels are incredibly sophisticated. Many of them run out of the Balkans, and they have people with experience from the Balkan wars and logistics that would blow your mind. So they had successfully infiltrated international shipping. And in 2019, a tanker was busted in Philadelphia that JP Morgan owned. They didn't operate it, and $1.5 billion of cocaine was taken off this tanker. So once that happened, the cartels sort of had to start all over again. And there were two answers. One of them was a route into, it was called Highway 10. It was the 10th parallel from Brazil to West Africa, where they would disperse the drugs. And basically, once they made that run, they were going to win because they were diversified, right? They could break up a ton into many different kilos, and the kilos had a higher likelihood of reaching the market. Once European authorities and navies got wise to that, we come to the piece that I wrote, which is that they shocked European intelligence by finding people who were willing to run this huge risk of crossing the Atlantic, on these ships that it's wrong to call them submarines. I mean, they are semi-submersibles. They're also semi-habitable.
Do we have a sense of how long this journey should take under normal circumstances versus how long these people are spending out there on the open water?
It's a month-long journey, I understand, in the best cases. And Jord acknowledged to me, as anyone would, that the odds that there aren't crews and cargoes at the bottom of the ocean are not zero, right? There's absolutely wrecks that they just don't know about because, they acknowledge that there are successes that they don't know about. There absolutely have to be wrecks.
Dana, so you've got this great, you got these details that here's the cartels. They're somewhere in the Amazon, as you say, under mangrove trees, building these things out of fiberglass. Have you seen one of these captured? Have you ever seen photographs of them? And what do they look like?
They look like jerry-rigged bathtubs.
They look like claustrophobia machines then.
I say that with full respect for the power of gallows humor. And one of the most powerful lines, and I'm glad that this person came to the lunch because was the analyst who couldn't be named, but had such tremendous empathy speaking to the pictures that she'd seen of the conditions inside of these boats. They don't care about the people. The cartels don't care about the people. I was happy that in the piece, the analyst was willing to distinguish between the actions of the cartels and the suffering of these crews, where if you look at even the allotment of space in these vessels that are barely seaworthy, so little is given to the human beings, maybe 1/6. It's the cargoes, it's these disgusting diesel engines. The quote of the analyst was the air they breathe.
Do you think they're going to win this war, or are they just like trying to search for pennies in the bottom of a well?
I would say that given the shocks that the world is experiencing right now, the smart money would be on people who are supplying numbness.
Dana, it's a great story. Terrific reporting, and a look into just, I guess, entrepreneurship these days and the entrepreneurial spirit.
Thank you guys for having me. I really appreciate it.
Michael, you've already had to listen to my rather lengthy review of Burberry's fall-winter runway show, which I was fortunate enough to attend in London back in February. I will spare all of you here, but in short, I want it all, and the coats and shoes are non-negotiable.
Yes, I know. You want every single item in looks number 12 and number 35.
You're wonderful, but I'm not going to wait until fall to get in on the Burberry magic, and my fellow mothers, neither should you. Our day is coming, Sunday, May 11th, in fact, and Burberry has so many delights in store for us.
The brand's new campaign shows them off in style. It stars Jerry Hall and two of her daughters, Lizzie and Georgia May Jagger, as well as two of her grandchildren, and it brings us into their stylish world.
In my next life, I really wouldn't mind being a Jagger, but for now, I'll settle for a Burberry trench coat, or shall I say another one. I rely on my Waterloo heritage for approximately 300 days of the year. London life practically requires it. There are lots of great versions to choose from, but I'm also loving how details from the trench are showing up in subtle ways in Burberry's jackets and dresses.
And for those of you who are really stuck on Mother's Day gifts, the Highland family of bags will not fail you, especially the tote and crossbody in Burberry check. That motif also appears in sunglasses, wallets, bags, and even reversible wool capes that are sure to charm the stylish women in your life.
Don't fail us this Mother's Day. One word, Burberry.com. We'll love you for life. All right, well, on that note, Sloane Crosley is going to join us. She has some simpler pleasures to discuss today. Sloane is an essayist, she is a novelist, and she is also, as of 2024, a memoirist. And her wonderful memoir on that note, called Grief is for People, came out in hardcover last year. It is out in paperback now, and she is here to tell us not only about the allure of the paperback novel, but also share some of her favorites that have been published over the years. Welcome, Sloane.
Hi, Hi, thank you for having me.
Okay, Sloan, before we get into the paperback version of your new memoir, Grief is for People, I want to talk to you about the paperback mystique, okay? I grew up reading paperbacks, as did Michael. We know that the hardcover has a place of reverence for many. You worked in publishing. Break this down for us.
Well, I mean, I worked in publishing in paperback publicity specifically for about 10 years. Our joke was always, and I'm going to go ahead and make an analogy that not everyone will probably get, but the train has kind of already left the station, so I'm just going to make it, which is, if you've ever seen the original Troop Beverly Hills, there's like the evil red feather troop that sells Girl Scout cookies to everybody, and then the good troop comes by and all the houses are like, yeah, we just bought Girl Scout cookies from your friends, so we're not buying more cookies, which is essentially what doing paperback publicity is like. So you're trying to get all this media, but everybody just covered the book. So breathing new life into the paperback is sort of what I did for all these books for a decade. And to me, they're the books that people actually read. I think paperbacks are obviously where books live on in perpetuity and forever. People have beloved editions. They tend to underline paperbacks. They tend to disseminate them. But within the publishing world, they're considered underdogs.
In the issue this week, you give a really fun list of some paperbacks that are your favorites. I mean, how did you come up with these, and will you tell us about some of them?
Sure. It was actually pretty hard to come up with them because I had to think of sort of very unscientific metric or parameter, which is what is a significant or notable paperback publication of the last century. But the ones I picked, I felt were done with a specific kind of care internally from book publishing, like Everything is Illuminated was one I picked, because it was really one of the first examples, at least in this century, of a publishing house. It was Perennial, who decided the book was so huge, what fun thing can we do with it? And they published 3 different covers, 3 different neon covers for the paperback. That was kind of new. Now that's sort of typical. It's not so shocking. Same with A Little Life is sort of interesting to me because it didn't actually take off that much in hardcover. But Hanya with A Little Life, it had a sort of slow build in hardcover and then really took off and sold over 1.5 million copies in paperback. And that was sort of interesting that it wasn't just this sort of like rocket obvious thing on the bestseller list. And then historically, I mean, I thought Lady Chatterley's Lover and Tropic of Cancer for obvious reasons. But I even have a copy, actually, of Tropic of Cancer from my great aunt that has printed on the back, not to be imported into the United States.
Sloan, one of the books I love that you have is Bright Light's Big City, which was never had a hardcover because it was a vintage, and that was back then. They just were doing paperback of that line, right?
Yeah, Vintage did paperback of that. The Sports Writer, a lot of the Richard Ford. I'm trying to think, there were a bunch of other ones. I mean, there was a real demand, I believe it was, again, actually in the 50s, for a high quality paperback edition that wasn't the kind we all sort of associate with maybe drugstores. Not the mass market, but a high quality, beautiful paperback. And Knopf, Alfred Knopf really sort of led the way when he founded Anchor Books. But the vintage originals really sort of, piloted the idea of them being good. And Bright Light's Big City really changed all that, because obviously we know what that book is today.
Well, Sloan, thank you so much for sharing this with us. And also, thank you for this great paperback edition that will be selling hundreds of millions of copies after this interview of Grief is for People.
Thank you for having me.
Bye, Sloan.
There's only one place to discover a global snapshot of the current cultural scene. Airmail's Arts Intel Report, our international research tool for what to do and where and when to do it, is user-friendly, continuously updated, and meticulously curated. Arts Intel is handy at home, on the road, and when you're planning your next trip. It also includes indispensable lists of restaurants and hotels in key cities around the world, recommended by our well-traveled experts. Explore Arts Intel at airmail.news/arts-intel, and be sure to sign up for our Week in Culture newsletter, which is published every Wednesday afternoon at airmail.news/WIC. I'm Chris Garrett, Airmail Deputy Editor, and I never leave home without it. Bon voyage.
So, Michael, on that note, it is the weekend. I know you've got something you can recommend to us. Please, something.
I do. There is a movie that's opening here in New York City. That's not yet streaming anywhere. I'm sure it will. It's called Drop Dead City, and it is a documentary. 50 years ago, 1975, New Yorkers woke up to a headline on the front page of the New York Daily News, Ford to City Drop Dead. And this is directed by a guy named Peter Yost and Michael Royton. And it's about the financial cataclysm that hit the city back then when the powers that be realized the city was $6 billion in debt and on the edge of bankruptcy. Anyway, it's a sort of great archival clips and footage and interviews with people about how the city walked right up to the edge of bankruptcy and almost fell apart. It's got, like I said, great archival footage. But it's really kind of like you learn it's about the money and how the movie follows the money and tells this larger story of New York with kind of big applications today, like big cities facing financial pressures. So it's great. It's opening this weekend at the IFC here in New York City, and I'm sure it'll be streaming soon. It's called Drop Dead City. And you, my dear, what do you got for us?
Well, Michael, I followed your advice last week and I did watch the second season of The Last of Us. It's very good. Although some spoilers so far. Everyone's talking about the spoilers, but I don't actually know what the spoilers are. Do you care to weigh in on this?
Well, I think if you watch the second episode this past week, we can't talk about it because I don't want to spoil it, but the second episode kind of just starts the season off now, throwing a lot of cards on the table. So that's all I'll say.
Well, did you watch what I quasi-recommended, which is the Florence Pugh, Andrew Garfield romantic drama with a very similar name? It's called We Live in Time. Did you see that one?
Yes, I did. But, I agree with you because, all these things sound like the titles of Sally Rooney novels.
You're so right. It's like they've got some AI bot that's just churning them out. It's The End of Us, We Live in Time, The Last of Us, Conversations with Friends.
Normal People, which is a Sally Rooney novel.
It's all like painfully normcore. Give me something I can remember, like Oppenheimer, for God's sakes.
There you go. Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's another one for you, Michael. Fairly enjoyable. If you like high-end British chefs and their various maladies and romances, what's not to love? Florence Pugh's great.
It's a little tearjerker, a little rom-com-y. It's a mashup of both.
By the way, what I am going to recommend, which I realize I sound like Scott Galloway on Pivot, but the city of Los Angeles, Michael. I had not been there in so long. We flew back to London via LA. So after visiting our family in Southern California, I went there for 2 nights. That city, has undergone such an incredible stress and duress in the past 4 or 5 months. I thought there was a great energy on the street. It was kind of giving me New York vibes, in fact.
I'm glad to hear that. I'm going to be out there in June, so I'm excited now.
A recipe for happiness, Michael. Stay at Shutters, rent bikes, go down to Giusta in Venice on your rental bike, and then spend like a fabulous night at the Santa Monica Pier going on the rides. I don't really see you doing that, but it is fun.
No, you don't know me.
Would you seriously do that? Because if so, I'll go with you.
Go to the Santa Monica Pier?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm just telling you that roller coaster is surprisingly thrilling.
But yeah, actually, before we go, speaking of all these strange stories, I want to ask you a story you've got in the issue this week that comes out of the British boarding school and what we might call, I think the headline this week is Goodbye, Mr. G.
Well, if you live in the UK long enough, you're going to discover this phenomenon of the professional guardian. So one of the country's greatest exports is its education of the world's wealthiest children. Brand names like Eton, Harrow, Winchester, Radley, Wickham Abbey. It's, the Harvard, Yale, and Princeton of the boarding school set. And as a result, a lot of families, especially from Asia, send their children all the way to the UK to be educated, some starting as young as 8 years old. Now, what happens if your child ends up getting the norovirus or there's a pandemic like COVID? They have to have someone that's appointed to take care of them in case of an emergency. Enter the professional guardian. So I looked into that phenomenon this week. There are about 63 agencies that are considered gold standard accredited agencies by an agency here in the UK. And they all can match your child with a guardian to take care of them. And sort of at the baseline level, yes, they are there for emergencies, but they're also coordinating travel. They are buying birthday gifts. They are arranging birthday parties. And they are also taking your child out for a hot chocolate if they're feeling a little bit homesick. So they really are a parent by proxy, and they cost around $13,000 a year. It can vary quite wildly depending on how many services you're getting. To me, it's such a fascinating world of the types of sacrifices that parents are making in order to give their children this uniquely British education.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's parent by guardian or maybe just, the starter set for personal assistant, but it's there.
Yeah, it's like an entry-level chief of staff. Get them started young.
Exactly. Get them started young. Get them barking out orders when they're 12 years old.
It is sort of that quintessential product of a British boarding school, right? Abandonment.
Exactly.
We'd like to thank our sponsor, Burberry. Michael, will you please read us out?
Morning Meeting is produced by Airplay Productions and edited by Jesse Cannon. Our co-editors are Graydon Carter and Alexander Stanley. Our chief operating officer is Bill Keenan, and our deputy editors are Ashley Baker, Chris Garrett, Nathan King, Julie Vitale, and Ash Carter. Our CMO is Emily Davis, and our music supervisor is Randall Poster. Our theme music is The Cute Monster by the Buddy Collette Quintet. A new edition of Airmail is published every Saturday, so please subscribe and enjoy all of our stories on airmail.news, which we update every day. You can also find us on Twitter and Instagram at Airmail Weekly. We will be back here next Saturday with another edition of Morning Meeting. In the meantime, be sure to subscribe at Spotify or Apple Music, but most of all, thank you again for joining us.